Good evening, everybody, and good evening to those who are joining us live on Facebook. We are starting the inaugural Mishnah share with tractate Pesachim, and this is Le'ili Nishmas Imi Marirasi Rivka Bas Harab Reb Shlomi. This is in memory of my mother. May God bless her soul. If you don't have a Mishnayis in today's day, you can download the Kahati on your telephone or on your app, on your tablet, and you can follow along. Pesachim is in Seder Moed, and we are ready to begin. La'arba Asar, on the eve of the 14th of Nisan. Now it's interesting that the Mishnah employs the term Ur. Ur literally means by the light of. And we're going into dark. So the question is why would we start with the word Ur why are we using the word Ur to describe the evening? And different Mefarshim talk about this, and they explain, one of the explanations is that we're starting now a tractate of Pesachim, and so we don't want to use night, so we use a different term, Ur, and this term is used elsewhere in other places. It's a euphemistic term because we want to use words that are positive, and everybody knows what we're talking about. We're talking about the evening of the 14th. So boitkin es chametz. So we search for the chametz on the eve of the 14th. La'ur haner, by the light of a candle. And it's interesting to note that the light of the candle is an important detail. And if for whatever reason a person ends up searching for chametz during the daytime, apparently he's supposed to use a candle in any case. We don't use a torch, we use a candle, and there are reasons for this, many reasons for this. Now, the Mishnah tells us that any place to which you do not bring chametz into does not require a bedika. And this is a chiddush, this is a novelty, because just because you don't bring in chametz doesn't mean there isn't any chametz in there. As we're going to learn in a moment, that we're going to learn that even if you don't bring chametz into a place, the possibility exists, for example, if a weasel, a mouse, or any other rodent brings in chametz into the place, you're going to have chametz there. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, the Mishnah tells us clearly that if you don't bring in chametz, so you don't have to check it. You don't have to search that place. So the Mishnah continues. Now the Mishnah questions something. We're going to talk about a dispute in a moment between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. And so now there's a dispute as to how one needs to check their wine cellar. And so the question that the Mishnah is forestalling is Velama Amru. So why was there a dispute between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai in regards to a wine cellar? Wine cellars is not places where you bring in chametz. Wine cellars are places where there's no chametz. It's just wine. Wine is kosher for Pesach, generally speaking. So the Mishnah answers very simply, Makom shemachnisim bechametz. So it happens to be this type of wine cellar that they're talking about is a place where you do bring in chametz. So if you're not careful, there's a room in your house, and you're not careful not to bring chametz in the whole year, so that's a place where you bring in chametz, because you're not thinking about chametz in middle of Cheshvan or any other month. And so therefore, we're talking about a place where you're not careful not to bring chametz in. So now Beis Shammai says, Shnei shuris al pnei kol hamartev. So there's the way wine cellars are, there's barrels lined up there. And Beis Shammai says, over the rows, and I'm going to show you an illustration in a moment, over the rows, you have to check 2 lines over the entire cellar. Now, there's a dispute in the Gemara about exactly what that means, 2 rows. So here you have, according to Rabbi Yehuda, he says these two front rows here. That's what Beis Shammai says has to be checked. So you have to check in and around these two. Further back, even if you came into the cellar without with chametz in it, you wouldn't have thrown it further. It would have fallen right there in the front. And according to Rabbi Yechanan in the Gemara, so this is what he's saying. He's saying one row in the front and one row on the top. So that's according to Beis Shammai. And Beis Hillel says, Shtei shureis achitzonos sheim al yenes, the two uppermost sets of barrels. And again, here you have a dispute between Rav and Shmuel. This is according to Rav. This is what it looks like. These are the areas that you have to check about for the chametz. And again, his opinion is if you came in with chametz, according to this opinion, it would be right there in the front at eye level. And then, according to Shmuel, it's the top two. That's where your arms would go and put chametz. And so those are the areas. So even though you're bringing chametz into the rooms there, into the cellar, both Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel say that only the front area. Wine cellars is not a place where you're hanging out and eating and chametz is going all over the place. If you brought in chametz and there is a little bit of chametz there, it's going to be in those aforementioned places.
Why can't you use the same excuse like you said before that the mouse can take the chametz?
So excellent question. We mentioned before that it's a chiddush that you don't have to check into places that you don't bring chametz in, because perhaps a mouse or a weasel will bring in. Very good. Beis. Ein choshishin shema gerira chulda mebayis labayis u'mamakim lamakim. So the Mishnah tells us, saw that there's going to be a fellow named Mordechai who's going to have a question, and it right away says, Ein choshishin shema gerira chulda mebayis labayis u'mamakim lamakim. They're making a statement. We don't concern ourselves with the possibility that possibly a weasel or any other rodent, for that matter, dragged chametz from one house to another house or from one place to another place. The imkain, because if you're going to say that, if we're going to say start entertaining these doubts, so then the imkain mechatzer lechatzer, we could say, well, I checked my entire chatzer and I cleaned everything up and it was all clear for Pesach, but now maybe my neighbor didn't, and a rodent brought it in. We could check an entire city, and then we can say, well, the neighboring city may be over there.
So there's no end.
There's no end. So, even though, in theory, in one's own house, perhaps we should be worried. There is a davar seif, but once the chachamim establish that we don't worry for this. Now, I should note that this is all in general, but without any specific knowledge or sight of a mouse, a weasel. But if you see a mouse or a weasel with chametz in its mouth running around your house or running into a room that was already checked, you need to go check for it. You need to make sure that it's not in there or that the mouse ate it up. Here we're just talking about we don't know if we don't have any specific knowledge that a mouse was dragging chametz around. Okay, Mishnah Gimel. Rabbi Yehuda says, Boitkin arba asar. He says that you are to check, you are to do the bedikas chametz on the evening of the 14th, like we do on our days, uva asar, and on the 14th day itself, which means Erev Pesach in the morning, Shachris, b'shas sabir, or all of these are alternatives. Or you can do it at the time that we burn our chametz. The Chachamim have a similar view, but different. The Chachamim say, Loi bodak arba asar. The preference is to do it at night, the 14th by night. If you didn't, so then Loi bodak arba asar. Loi bodak arba asar, yiduk arba asar. If you didn't do it at night, you do it in the morning. They continue. If you didn't do it on the day of Erev Pesach, for whatever reason, doesn't matter what the reason was, you still have an issue here going on because you have chametz perhaps in your possession on Pesach. So during Chol Hamoed, you're going to have to go check for the chametz.
So if you know you're going to be away on the 14th, could you do it on the 13th?
You could do it earlier. Yes, you can do it earlier. That's a separate discussion discussed in Shulchan Aruch as to when you can do it. And now, Yivdik B'Seich Hamoed, Lo Bodak B'Seich Hamoed. Now, what happens if, for whatever reason, you left the country and you forgot or whatever it is, and you didn't, not on the Eve, and not on Erev, and not on the intermediate days of Pesach, Yivdik L'Achar HaMoyed. So now you have another issue. You have to even check for chametz after you get back home, after the Chag is over. Why is that? And that is because the halacha is that chametz shabar alav. Pesach chametz that belongs to a Jewish person that Pesach passed over Pesach, which means you owned it during Pesach, so it needs to be destroyed after Pesach as well. So even after Pesach, you still have to do a badika. Now we're going back. So what happens when a person does a badika on the evening of the 14th, the eve of the 14th? So yanichenu v'tzina. So whatever chametz you do leave over, because you can still eat chametz that whole night, the next morning, until the time that it comes that you can't eat chametz anymore. This is what we're discussing. We'll be discussing in a couple of Mishnahs. So you have to put it away. First of all, the chametz that you find. That in our day we have a custom. We make a bracha on the badikas chametz, and you put out 10 pieces of bread. That bread, which you find, you have to put it in a secure place. You don't want this to now get lost somewhere. Now you got a big problem. Additionally, the food that you're going to be eating that night, and the food that you're going to be eating in the morning. And there are certain cases, for example, when Erev Pesach is on a Shabbos. So now you're going to do the B'dikas Chametz on Thursday night, and you're going to destroy your Chametz on Friday, but you still have some Chametz left that you're going to need to make Lechem Mishnah on Friday night, and you're going to have Lechem Mishnah on Shabbos day. So you have a bunch of Chametz that you are not selling, you're not specifically not selling, you're not getting rid of it. This is Chametz that you have on, that has to be taken care of before Pesach. So in any case, you have to make sure that you put it in an appropriate place, that not Shabbos in the morning or Erev Pesach. Oh, where did I put it? So, Kadesh liyeh tzarich b'dika acharav. The purpose of this is you don't want to be needing to do a b'dika, a search for the chametz after you are done. Okay, now the next Mishnah Dalit. Rabbi Meir Omer. Rabbi Meir says, Oichlin kol chamish. V'seifrim b'schilas sheish. You can eat chametz the entire 5th hour, and you burn the chametz in the beginning of the 6th hour. Now, it's important to note that hours here, whenever we talk about hours in the Mishnah, it's halachic hours. Shor zmaniyos. Thank you. Which means that we take the amount of hours of daylight and we split them up into 12. And in the summer, you're going to have hours that are an hour and 20 minutes, hour and 15 minutes, or whatever it is. And in the winter, you're going to have shorter hours that are 50 minutes, 52 minutes. Depending on where you are in the world is going to depend on what your hours actually look like. So in any case, Rabbi Meir says, you eat chametz without an issue for the 5th hour, and you burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour. Rabbi Yehuda says, he argues, he disputes this, and he says, Oichlin kol arba. You eat for the entire 4th hour. V'seilin kol chomesh. And things are left in abeyance for the 5th hour, which means you don't eat it, but you don't necessarily need to burn it just yet. V'seifrin b'schilas sheish, and you burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour.
They both agree that you burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour.
They both agree that you burn it in the beginning of the 6th hour. The difference is whether you can eat in the 5th hour or not. Now, in the style of the Mishnah, once we talk about Rabbi Yehuda, we're going to talk about something else that Rabbi Yehuda says. And especially now, this relates to Pesach. In the Beis HaMikdash, there were these benches, if you will, that had covers to them. So a person could sit comfortably outside of the Beis HaMikdash proper. And so they're on top of this kind of shade that they had on top of it, this roof that they had on top of these benches. It was an elevated space, and people can see it from around. So what they would do is, in order to signal the times, they would use this space to place chales of teida psules on top of this shade that were on top of these benches. Now, let me explain something to you as follows. On Erev Pesach, after Baruch Shamar, what do we omit? We omit Mizmor L'Seida. Why do we omit Mizmor L'Seida? Because Mizmor L'Seida is in place, or it reminds us of the carbon taida that was brought in the Beis HaMikdash. A carbon taida is a carbon that is brought for Thanksgiving. To thank Hashem, you were released from prison, or if you were healed from a sickness, or whatever it is, a miracle, if you travel the desert. So you bring a carbon taida. Now, a carbon taida, along with the carbon taida, was brought 40 matzos, so to speak, or 40 breads. 10 of those breads were chametz. Now, a carbon taida, you can only eat on the day that you bring it, until chatzais halayla. So whatever time you bring it, that's, you can start eating these loaves of bread, or matzah, and you have until the middle of the night, chatzais halayla. Now, what happens is that they're kodesh, they're holy. You cannot lessen the time purposefully for the amount of time that you can eat kodesh. So on an ordinary time, whenever you bring the carbon, now you have all the way till chatzos halayla to eat all of this. The issue here is that Pesach is coming. Pesach is coming that day. So on the 14th, they do not allow anybody to bring a carbon taida. Now, this is an issue because you have people traveling from far and wide, and you have a lot of people who are doing the hagoimel of the time, which is bringing the carbon taida. So, because if they were to bring the carbon taida, 10 of those loaves, which are actual chametz, would have to be burnt earlier. You cannot willingly go into such a situation. So, all of the people who were coming in for Pesach, and all the people who had to bring carbon taidas, were having, even if it were a regular day, we're having double the amount of carbon taidas being brought on that day, which is a lot of loaves that have to be eaten. What's more is that they have many more people who are Eila Regel now. So you have, I don't know, thousands maybe of carbon taidas that are being brought on the 13th day of Nisan. So now, what happens with all of these carbon taidas? So you can't eat them all. So many of them become nicer. They're left over. Left over, you can't. Once it hits chatzos, you're no longer allowed to eat it, and they have to be burnt. We can't eat them anymore.
Right.
So
They can't be. They're not held in abeyance.
So now they don't have to be burnt immediately. So now what do we do? So what do? They would take two of these psules, two of these lechem teida chalis psules that were left overnight, again, because there were so many, and they just take two, and would put them up on the top. Menachos al gaga etztaba, and they would put them up on top. Now, again, why was it on top? What was the purpose of putting it on top? Because it's a elevated place, people can see it. Kol zman shemunachos, so long as they're sitting there on top, this is the sign for everybody. Kol ha'am oichlin, everybody can eat chametz there. So the people are eating the last chaper nadayin, the last chametz that they have with them, whatever sandwiches their wife packed for them to take along the way, so they can still eat it. Nitla achas, when they remove one of these loaves from the top of this cover, so Tailin, so then we know we can no longer eat chametz. Now we have to keep it in suspension. Lo yoichlin lo seifrim, we don't eat it and we don't burn it. Although in theory, we can burn it, but we like to do things in the proper time. Nitlu shteyem, as soon as they remove the second one, hischilu kol ha'am surfin, then the people start the fires, and they start burning all the chametz. Now, Rabbi Gamliel says, chulin necholin kol arba. Rabbi Gamliel changes, if you remember, we had a dispute as to what about the fifth hour. Can you eat during the fifth hour, or could you not eat during the fifth hour? So Rabbi Gamliel now says, hold on. It depends which food we're talking about. Chulin, non-hektish, non-kodesh food, I should say non-kodesh food, regular food. So we just eat it through the fourth hour, and the fifth hour it's in abeyance, and we burn it in the sixth. But truma, we have a different issue. Truma is holy. Truma is the portions that we remove for the kohen, and it is a holy item. It's holy. You have to be pure when you eat it. You have to do your very best to keep it from becoming ritually contaminated. So now what happens is that the truma, we can't just burn. You're not going to just burn truma. Truma is holy. Only if it becomes impure can you burn truma. So to start burning it an hour early is a problem. Plus, truma also, we're not supposed to willingly put truma in a situation where we can't eat it. So, well, again, because it's kosher and it's intended to be eaten. It's only if it becomes impure, or if it becomes rotten, so then we can't eat it. But as a matter of preference, we should try to protect truma. So according to Rabbi Gamliel, he says, chulin non-truma foods, eat till the fourth. Whatever you haven't eaten, just burn. What's the big deal? Truma, we have an issue because it's kodesh, it's holy. So therefore, we eat truma the entire fifth hour. We don't make any gzeirus not to eat it in the fifth hour. Everyone agrees that in theory you could eat it. The question is whether you should eat it at that time. The sefer and the now we burn it in the beginning of the sixth hour. Now, Rabbi Chanina Skan HaKoyanim Omer. We're on Mishnah Vav, the sixth Mishnah, in the first Perek. And Rabbi Chanina, the Skan, the administrator of the Kohanim, he says the following. Mi'imeyim shel Koyanim loy nimnu milisreif es abosar shenitmo bevladatuma im abosar shenitmo ba'avatuma. So, first I'll translate and then I'll explain what we're talking about here. Rabbi Chanina says that in all the days of the recordings of the Kohanim of what they did and didn't do, he's telling us a statement of fact. They never hesitated to burn truma that was contaminated with a vlada tuma. Vlad literally means a child of tuma, a lesser level of tuma, with truma that had become contaminated with the father of tuma, a more severe level of tuma, of impurity. Afal pi, shamaisifin tuma al tumasi. Even though when you're going to mix them together, now we're going to burn them, what's happening? Now the lesser contaminated truma is going to become more contaminated. So says Rabbi Chanina, it doesn't matter. Because contaminated is contaminated, you can't eat it anymore. Meaning that you can't eat it anymore, it doesn't matter, and so therefore, they never refrain from doing this, it's not an issue. Now, why are we talking about this now? It's a good question. What does this have to do with Pesach? So, in a minute, if you have to, the way of the Mishnah, sometimes you have to have a little patience. We're going to learn a couple of halachas, and then we'll get to the point as to its relevancy here with Pesach. Rabbi Akiva added to this idea. Omar, and he says, "Mimeim shel koyanim loy nimnu milahadlik es hashemen shenifsal b'tful yom b'ner shenitma b'tmei meis." He continues and he says a similar idea that the Kohanim, in all the days of the Kohanim, they never refrained from lighting oil of truma that became impure from a tful yom, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. Together with oil that became contaminated with the tmei meis. Now, a tful yom is the lightest level of tuma that we have here. What is a tful yom? A tful yom is a person who has already gone to the mikvah to rid himself of his impurity. He's gone to a proper mikvah. However, he needs to wait till the nightfall. There are many tumas, not all, but there are certain tumas that you need to immerse in a mikvah, and you have to experience nightfall. So, if it's daytime, you're still impure, even though you already went to the mikvah. For example, a woman who's a nida and goes into the mikvah, even if she goes during the daytime, The day after, for example, the time she's supposed to go to the mikveh, it's that during the day, she needs to wait till night, and that's the reason why mikvahs are open at night. We don't want to have any confusion. So even though you went into the mikvah, you're still impure until you experience nighttime. As soon as it's night, now you are fully pure. So such a person who has already purified themselves, they're only waiting for haravas shemesh, they're only waiting for nightfall. That is called, in Mishnah terms, a tful yoin, a person who immersed by day. Now he has to wait till night.
That's the lowest level.
That's the lowest level of tumah. A tmei mace is the highest level of tumah.
So if it's the lowest level, it's not considered truma. Is it considered chulin?
No. We're not talking about the food. Okay. It's the lowest level of contamination,
I see.
not the lowest level of food. Okay. So which means, a person whose only issue, he already went to the mikvah, whatever his impurity was,
daytime.
It's still daytime. So he has to now wait till night to eat truma and to touch. Now he goes and he touches shemen. Shemen is a liquid. A liquid becomes impure by the touch of the tful yain. So now it became impure. Had he touched chulin foods, by way of example, it wouldn't be impure altogether. But because it's wet and it's truma, it's now an issue here. He makes it impure, but it's a very light level of impurity. Nevertheless, it's impure and it cannot be eaten as truma. What do you do with fuel? What do you do with oil that became impure? So you're allowed to burn it. For the Kohen can burn it. And there's other instances, and that's discussed elsewhere in the Mishnah and the Gemara. You can light it in the Beis Knesset, where the public will benefit from it. But that's only if it's impure, if it became impure. So now it became impure, but it's only impure due to the level of a tful yain. Nevertheless, you can't eat it. And since you can't eat it, and it's impure, you can mix it together with shemen, with oil that was contaminated through a tmei mace. Afalpi, even though shemaisif and tuma al tumasi, you're adding tuma, layers of tuma, one layer upon the next layer. Amar Rabbi Meir, Mishnah Zion. So now, all of these discussions about adding tuma, one level of tuma to another level of tuma, all of this is leading up to the following discussion. Amar Rabbi Meir says, Midivreihem, Rabbi Meir says, well, based on all of these statements that we just made about adding tuma, one level of tuma to another level of tuma, lo madnu, we can deduce shesarfen truma tahira im hatmeya b'Pesach, that we could burn truma tahira, that is chametz, im hatmeya b'Pesach. Why? Because it's a prohibited substance. A truma that's a chametz is a prohibited substance. And so now we can take anything that's impure, whether it's chametz or not, we can mix the two and burn it. Why? Because we're just adding one thing to the next. Amar Rabbi Yasi says, not so fast. You can't compare the two cases. In the earlier cases, you're trying to say just because you can't eat it, so now you can burn it with something that's impure. Rabbi Yasi says it's not the same thing. Eina hi amida. This is not the same measurement. It's not the same idea. In the earlier cases that we explained, what was the story there? The story is that the food is contaminated. And now we're just going from a lesser level of contamination to a greater level of contamination. Here, the issue is not that there's a contamination on the truma. The truma is pure. The only problem is you can't eat it because it's chametz. And you're not allowed to have chametz on Pesach. So chametz and truma are not related. And being that they're not related, they're two different ideas, so you have to separate them and burn them separate.
But you can do it at the same time, you just can't do them together.
You can't do them together, yes, naturally. Umaydim Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. So now Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua pipe into this discussion. Shirseifin zula atzmei v'zula atzmei. Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua, apparently there's an argument as to exactly in relation to chametz truma and impure things to be burnt together. Now, so if so what exactly is going on here? Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua explain the following. Both of them agree that when you have a case like we just discussed, like the case of Rabbi Yossi, that you have to burn them separately. Aman nechlaku, but in which case do they actually argue? Al hatluya val hatmeya. When there are certain trumas that are tluyas. We're unsure as to what the nature. It's a suffix. It's a doubt. Perhaps it's a sfeik tameh. A sfeik tameh, you're not allowed to eat it because maybe it's tameh. So in such a case, in a case when it could be used as a fuel, like in a case of oil, so then you're allowed to burn sfeik tameh oil. And now you have now here the question here is the tluya here in this case is the chametz. If it's a question if it's chametz. So we don't know if it's so in such a case there's many doubts here. There are many doubts that are going on here. So being that it's a suffix, so should Rabbi Elazar says the set of zulatzmi v'zulatzmi. He says generally in these types of things, issues, prohibitions that are not related, keep them separate. Keep the chametz with the chametz, keep the truma impurities with the truma impurities, and that's it. Rabbi Yeshua says, Shteim ka'echas, you can burn them both together. We have concluded the first chapter. I think we'll leave it here for now. Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah. What is the difference? If they are impure, it's impure. Let's just burn it together. Why all the discussion? Burn it together. It doesn't make a difference. It's impure.
Right.
Even if there is a suffix in something,
So-
you burn it anyway. You
So
don't
this
even
is
if
actually what the
there's
Mishnah says. The Mishnah says that when we're talking about the category of impurities, higher and lower, doesn't matter. You burn them together. Tluyos, now there's a situation here. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't.
But even if it's a fact.
So if it's possible, it's not impure altogether.
Yeah, but
you
if
give it
that means there is a
In
suffix.
so you're saying what you're saying is that you can't eat it anyway.
Yeah.
But even things that you can't eat, because you don't know, you can't just burn them because they're truma, they're holy. They're holy things. You can't just burn holy things. When can you burn holy things? So the halacha is when you know that they're impure. So therefore,
So if somebody were to actually eliminate the sfeika and merge it with something that's not,
yeah. So then
there's no issue.
okay. Yeah, but you're not allowed to purposefully
I understand.
do that. Again, but what you are allowed to do is you're allowed to add tumah to tumah,
Right.
and that is the point of the Mishnah. Not sure how to stop this thing.